Hey, what's up? It's your boy BobbySapphire, and today we are going to talk about and answer the question that I get most from people who play Star Wars Unlimited. It's about sideboarding. How do you sideboard? What do I take out? Can you make a video about sideboarding? Well, here it is. We're going to talk about all things sideboarding. If you're new to sideboarding or you haven't done any sideboarding, you don't even know what a sideboard is, you're not even sure there is one for this game, please check out my article for the Garbage Rollers at garbagerollers.com. Competitive Sideboarding 101 with BobbySapphire. I go over all the basics. I give examples of the different types of sideboards, and I even do a video where I explain how I sideboard with my Boba Fett deck. This video is more advanced. It's like intermediate sideboarding. Okay, brief overview of what we're going to go through in this video. First and foremost, understanding that your deck list is not 50 cards. It's not 50 cards with a 10-card sideboard. It's 60 cards. And again, if you're not playing sideboarded games, this video is not for you. But the thing that I dislike most about FFG's rollout of competitive play is that so many of our games so far are, best of one with a 50-card list. It's not how competitive play is going to be going forward. It's not how the game was designed. So you'll hear me say this a lot, like the deck list doesn't matter. Like, don't ask for a deck list, understand a matchup. That's 2 and 3 on this list. We can't figure out how to sideboard or what the list should even be if we don't understand how it plays and what its matchups are. And, when we think about matchups, we think about maybe the 3 pillars of aggro, mid-range, control, even though I think that there are more like 5 right now in this game. But understanding what's good in your deck against those things and what's specifically not good. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about understanding your matchups for what is good in those matchups. For example, when you're playing Boba Fett, you probably, Boba Fett's such a good deck in the meta, you probably want some making openings in there because it's really good against Boba Fett. It kills their little shieldy units without having to deal with the shields themselves and heals you a little life. So something like that is really important to understand what cards are good against certain things. We're going to talk about angling your deflectors, which is choosing your 50, your main deck. That we talk about in terms of, in a more controlling meta, you want your main deck to be more geared towards control. If you're not going to play against aggro decks, why would we, focus our card choices against aggro? And then finally, some shortcutting tips. This is for everyone who's ever wondered, what do I take out in a matchup? I'm going to teach you a couple shortcuts to build your sideboard so you don't stress yourself with extra mental tax during a tournament. All right, for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to use the Chewbacca deck that I run a lot, inspired originally by Sarna from the Polish Store Showdown event. If you're a follower of this channel, you're seeing this video, chances are you've seen my deck tech about this video, might be more familiar with it than some other lists. And I think it's just, when I'm thinking about sideboarding, I thought it was just a great example of one to go through the sideboard plans with. So lists are 60 cards, not 50 plus 10, right? We touched on that briefly. This is the 60 cards in my current build of Chewbacca Green with Energy Conversion Lab. Now, does this change all the time? Absolutely. Things get tweaked all the time. As you can see right now, I'm running some resupplies to try them out. I'm running some Vigilance because that's the hot card. If you're playing blue, why not play Vigilance for 6? So, I didn't build it with 60 cards in mind. Of course, I took someone's list and made adjustments, but when I am figuring out whether or not I want a sideboard built specifically towards aggro control, what I want to do is take the list I have and throw maybe 60, 65, 70 cards in there and start to whittle it down like this to have a general idea of what the whole picture should look like. And this comes from iterating games. I can't stress enough that lists need to come from understanding matchups and not just because you want to build a list. You're just not going to win as many games or sideboard as well or understand a best of 3 matchup without actually getting the games in. Let's take a look at this list, this 60, and what I don't like against control here. I don't like Vigilance against control. Our plan isn't to mill them. The Vigilances are there for killing things and gaining 6 against aggro. The way we're going to beat control is by recurring things with Home 1, Rogue Squadron Skirmisher, and making big plays with Luke and U-Wing reinforcement. They don't have little guys that we really want to whittle down and kill with make an opening, so that's bad. They're generally not going to be attacking into Chewie. Chewie's probably one of the least effective leaders in a control matchup because he doesn't hit for a lot, and they're not really trying to attack us until they control the board, so the Electro Staffs are out. They also have lots of removal, so putting those electro staffs on a little guy, not great. R2 is, out of all of the 2-drops that I want to put in my 60, he's like the least effective. He does have the nice 4 booty, and can kind of like help us with our deck, but we really want the extra card advantage with Mon Mothma, since like we want to get to a board state that they can no longer control, like they've run out of cards essentially, and that's how Mon Mothma comes into play. Do we want Takedown? If it's like Iden, Takedown is still pretty good. Do we want Vanquish? If they're playing Star Destroyers, maybe we want some Vanquishes. But for the most part, like we're just going to outvalue them. So I don't necessarily think that those are good. And so when I look at these 60 cards, like the ones with the X's are the ones that I want to take out. And the ones with the question marks are like obviously maybes, or maybe not that's obvious. Confiscate is another one. Like, do they have Traitorous? Do they have lights? Is it a Vader deck with lightsabers? Do they have a lot of shields? Then we want to consider Confiscate. But having a general idea of what's not good in the matchup is step one to sideboarding, because the hardest thing about sideboarding for people is like knowing what to take out. And so like having this idea of like, all right, what cards do I have X's on? That's what's going to allow us to sideboard better when it comes time for game 2 and 3. All right, we're going to do the same thing against aggro. Against aggro, we're probably never using the confiscates, right? Like, I don't know in what situation we would. Even if people are using things like Wing Leader or Metal Ceremony, like spending one and an action to take a +1/+1 off is just, not going to get there. Resupply, oftentimes against aggro, we don't really have time to resupply, so it's not the greatest pull. Takedown, again, is it a question mark? Like, it's really not efficient. Early game, like to just against Sabine to like tap out and do something for 4, they're going to do so many things on turn 3. It's not often the best thing that we can do. Vanquish is often too slow, and the home 1, even though it gains us a lot of life, like 8 resources, that's a million miles away. Like we need to get to the Chewie flip turn and then play things like Luke and Ewing reinforcement. So like those 8 drops are just coming out of our deck. And everything else is pretty good. Like, I don't even think Wing Leader is necessarily that good, but with Chewbacca making the Wing Leader a Sentinel and buffing another unit that can then kill something can be really strong. So, in this deck, it can stay in. It also can help things like close the game if we do flip and start to race with U-Wing reinforcement. So I just like it there. And the Electro Staffs, we can actually like suit up a small drop and start killing things a little bit quicker than we would normally. Like Akbar is a really good one, or Yoda to Electro Staff, because they can start killing things and restoring. And then, of course, like we're not main decking all these 2 drops, but R2D2 is going to be in because we do want those low drops. R2 plus a Fleet Lieutenant or an Electro Staff can start picking off units. So those are the things that I'm thinking about in terms of like what's good against the matchup and what's bad against the matchup. Okay, and if we're thinking about how we're going to angle our deflectors, what we're going to choose for our main 50, we want to choose, like, do we want to be better into aggro or do we want to be better against control/midrange? I didn't do a midrange slide because I think, like, that sort of goes into the control game, and I think if anything, you want to have, like, some main deck play against Boba Fett if you're thinking about midrange, and that's, like, where Make an Opening comes in. There are some other good midrange decks, like Chirrut and, like, Luke, but those are, like, a little bit more niche, like they're not played as much, so I try not to think about niche decks when I'm thinking about like my main deck, but I specifically think that we're currently sliding towards or are in like the scale of a control meta. So that's why I've done things here like move one of the restored arcs to the sideboard and have like I wanted 3 2-drops in my board, so like that was part of the plan to do that instead of like just throwing 3 R2s in there. Once I realized I didn't necessarily care if I had all the arcs, I was able to shave R2 from my sideboard and make some room in there. The confiscates, we were never going to main deck those, so those are in the board. I found that in a lot of these control matchups, the Electro Staff doesn't matter, like I said, so that's in the board. I don't really want 3 Make an Opening against a lot of decks, so that's in the board. I'd love 2 Wing Leader in the deck, but I just can't seem to fit it once I added the resupplies. So I threw one of those in the board. 1 Vanquish is usually enough. Threw one of those in the board. And Vigilance, like I said, we're not really skewed towards control when we play those Vigilances, but they're still really good main deck to do things like put a shield on somebody. Can still heal 5 in a lot of matchups, which is good. It's just a good overall card. That's why it's being played so heavily right now. And also, like, we can't just take every card that's bad against control out. Like, we got to have 50 cards. So this is where I've angled my deflectors a little bit more against control, but also still has a lot of game versus aggro and midrange. Okay, now I have my sideboard plans. Like, how am I boarding against control? I said we're already angled towards control, so I don't really have a lot of cuts. I'm just taking out the 2 Make an Opening and the 2 Vigilance. And I'm bringing in one of those Arcs and one of those Wing Leaders. And the Arc, just like to get the game online a little earlier, have that one more 2-drop that can start attacking in space, which like would be where I prefer to start attacking against a lot of matchups. So bringing that in, bringing the Wing Leader in to like buff something and like start to present a clock. It's also better with U-Wing reinforcement. And then even though the Electro Staffs aren't necessarily good against control, if I don't have a Traitorous, if the opponent doesn't have Traitorous, I don't really have much to bring in. Vanquish is always fine because I can just like kill a big unit. But if they don't have Traitorous, I'm probably fine bringing in Electro Staff because I'm going to have lots of resources to spend over the course of the game. And, rebuilding the board with maybe like a Battlefield Marine and an Electro Staff at some point in the game is going to put pressure on them. So I don't hate it, but I think it's a little bit better than bringing in the R2s. Obviously, if you think that another card would be better in this situation, like you should do that. This video is not about like teaching you what the list should be. It's to teach you like how I'm thinking about sideboarding and how you can think about sideboarding better. I definitely don't want the Make an Openings, and I definitely don't want the Vigilances. So I'd like to bring in 4 cards that are better than those. The Electro Staff, even though I don't love it against control, I still think it's better than what those cards are. So that's how I'm thinking about that situation. And then of course, like if I do see Traitorous or Lightsabers, if it's like a Vader control deck, I do want to bring in the Confiscate because Lightsabers can be a real hard time. It's like what helps other guys, other decks defeat Chewie really easily. So I really like Confiscate, and like in the blind, I probably would just bring in the Confiscates. And if I, hold one all game 2, and it doesn't pay off, maybe think about sideboarding it or maybe like resourcing it a little more aggressively for game 3 if there was one. But so these are the kinds of things I think about when I'm sideboarding against control with this deck. All right, and on the other end of the spectrum, we're looking at how we're sideboarding against aggro. Like compared to the control, you'll see like we're bringing in a ton of cards against aggro, and it's because we chose with our 50 to angle towards beating control. So what are the things that are bad? We talked about it. Like we don't want the resupplies. Vanquish is really slow. Home 1's really slow. So let's bring in a bunch of fast action. Bring in those 3 2-drops. Bring in the other Electro Staff. Like I said, we can suit up our guys, start killing things. Makes Chewie a beast against aggro. If we can get to that point in the game, they have a lot of trouble getting through him if they can't find a way to like circumvent him altogether. The Wing Leader, not amazing in this situation, but we did, we have spots, and I think it's still better than the cards that we are taking out. And then, bringing in that 3rd Vigilance for the kill and heal, possibly shielding up a Sentinel, can be really, really strong. So, again, we focused on what cards were bad against aggro. We're pulling them out, and then we just put in as many of the better cards as we can. All right, so I had another reason why I didn't want to talk too much about Midrange or Boba Fett when doing this, is because now I want you to think about, if you were playing this list, A, how would you sideboard? But B, would you make any changes? Do you not like my sideboard? Do you not like my 60? Tell me why. You can leave the sideboard plan in the comments, Discord, DM me, talk about it with your friends, talk about it with your frenemies, talk about it with your partner while they ignore you, whatever you want. But the idea is for you to take what you learned and apply it to, how would you do it? And even if you don't like the Chewie deck, even if you think you're an expert sideboarder, I still think taking 2 minutes to sort of think about this. I mean, if you're watching this video, I assume you want to be a better sideboarder. So, what would you do here? Let me know. All right, now I want to talk about some shortcuts that I use when I sideboard, and some that I recommend to my subscribers on Patreon, is just how to like shortcut things to not give you extra mental tax. Nothing worse than the clock is ticking, you're flipping through your cards in between games, you're just like, I don't know what to do. So these shortcuts are really, really good for not wasting mental energy, which is like such an important part of like our daily lives, but also tournament life. So the first thing I recommend is doing a 2-2-2-2-2 sideboard. 5 cards, 2 of them each. Really simple to pull in and out. It lets you have 2 strategies. One, identifying what's bad in a matchup like we just did. Or like if you're not quite sure what's bad in a matchup, you can just shave one-ofs that didn't feel good game 1. So like in this, I stand by this. I said it in like my very first Sabine deck tech. I like Heroic Sacrifice against control. I think it's a control meta, so the Heroic Sacrifices are in. In an aggro meta, I want to swap them out for Rebel Assault. So, against aggro, I'm going to take out my Heroic Sacrifices. I'm going to put in 2 Rebel Assaults and 2 Star Vipers and probably 2 Bright Hopes. So 3 Heroic Sacrifices come out, and I'll probably take out like 2 Dodonna, maybe a Gorilla Attack Pod, some things that, like, the aggro matchup often doesn't get to 6 resources. So, I could just cut the 3 Heroic, 3 Gorilla Attack Pod, put in the other 6 cards, and call it a day. But it lets you do things like that. Having the 2s makes it really, really simple to think about what I can swap in and out. And against control, what we want to do is take out things like, maybe we want to shave an X-Wing, maybe we want to shave a Red 3 because we want to put in some Fang Fighters for their Traitoresses or their shields or lightsabers. And, U-Wing reinforcement is a little bit better of a top end than maybe like an X-Wing or a Rebel Pathfinder. So in those matchups, I'm just like shaving a couple cards here and there to sort of like add in a little more depth to my match. Another configuration I really like is the 3-3-2-2. Obviously, like, we have to play fewer cards if we do this, but it lets us play 3 ofs, which, if you identify a card that's really, really good in a matchup, you want to bring 3 in. So, same deal. If I'm playing aggro, I can just swap the 3 Heroic Sacrifices for the 3 Rebel Assaults. I can swap the Gorilla Attack Pods for the Bright Hopes, and I've got my 6 cards. And then, I can do things like take out the Dodonnas for the Star Vipers and have like a good ECL target that can also gain me life. Against control, I might just be bringing in the 2 Fang Fighters and just cutting, 1 X-Wing and 1 Red 3 or something like that. But the idea is to like make the swaps ahead of time very easy. You can like have notes that you memorize and just, very simple swaps, not a sideboard like the Chewy one that has like a whole bunch of cards with a whole different kinds of things coming in and out. Even swaps, cards for cards. And we push that even swap thing even further if we do a 3-3-3-1 sideboard where we have the heroics for the Rebel Assault potentially. We have the Bright Hopes for the Gorilla Attack Pods. We have the Fang Fighters for, you might even take out like Steadfast Battalion in some control matchups because it doesn't really do a lot versus Iden. And then it doesn't decrease your For Cause I Believe in count. And then do something like take out 1 X-Wing for a U-Wing reinforcement. But what I like about these strategies are you pick the cards that are bad in a matchup, or like you'd rather just have a whole swap against them and just you have those 3 cards in the sideboard and you swap them in. But these kinds of shortcuts where you ahead of time make very easy decisions, and like you might say like, oh, I actually think I would have liked Steadfast in game 2, so like in game 3 I'm going to board a couple of those back in. But that's you learning the matchups, understanding the matchups, and making better decisions with more agency. Or like pulling a deck from the internet, right? Like if you make these decisions and you do it in real time, you're going to start to understand your deck better and you're going to play your deck better. Whoops. All right, so we went over a lot. We went over it real fast, but hopefully you have a better understanding that your deck list is 60 cards, not 50 plus 10. You can start to think about your decks in terms of like what is good and what is not good against certain matchups. How to choose your 50? Your 50 might change every single day. If you play a lot, like I do, I'm changing my list all the time, and I'm always swapping cards in and out of my sideboard or, just completely out of my deck altogether. I'll flash a picture now. I have all these cards hyper for a reason. I don't know what deck I'm going to bring to an event. I want to make sure that whatever I've got, it's hyper. All right, so that and all the shortcutting that we talked about in terms of like how we can sideboard easier and save our mental energy. I hope all these things made you a better sideboarder. If you have any questions or you want to chat about it at all, or you want some help thinking about what cards are bad in certain matchups, I highly recommend getting games and asking questions from people, including me. So I hope to hear from you, and see you at the tables.